Hello and welcome back to another episode of Thomas Makes Dumb Decisions. Today, I want to talk to you about a dumb decision that I made where I left the best project that I've ever worked on. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called Rift of the NecroDancer. Not to be confused with Crypt of the NecroDancer, which was the indie mega success made by Ryan Clark a long time ago. Then he founded this whole studio, Brace Yourself Games, and then they made the Zelda version of it. Not that either. Rift of the NecroDancer, which is kind of an amalgamation of Rhythm Heaven and Guitar Hero and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. So I want to talk about this because on paper, I was working on a project that looked really good. The project was really cool, a rhythm game with a cool indie team. I really enjoyed my coworkers. The pay was pretty good. It was a very cushy gameplay programmer job, but it begs the question, why would I leave that project? And that's what I want to talk about today. But first, before we can talk about me leaving the Rift of the NecroDancer project, I need to give you a little bit of career history. If you've seen my other videos, you may know some of this, but I'm going to try and fill in the details. Go back to like 2018, 2019. I'm graduated from college. I'm working this software consultant job, and it's okay, but I don't really love it. And it wasn't until I shifted into working remotely that I realized that I actually hated the work and I just liked my coworkers. And so basically what that job constituted was doing like database migrations and making these convoluted online forms for banks and insurance companies, and it was fine. But I realized that if I didn't make a change in my life, that's what I would be doing for up until retirement. And so I realized, oh, I'm having a little bit of a quarter life crisis here, so let's figure that out, right? So I was trying to think to myself, okay, what do I want to do with my life? I have this computer science degree. I don't really like the programming work that I'm doing. What am I going to do? And basically the way that I solved that question is I asked myself, if I were to win the lottery tomorrow, how would I spend my time? And obviously, like discounting the vacations and luxurious living parts of winning the lottery, like how would I keep myself occupied? What am I interested in? Like what would I actually be doing? And that was actually really helpful for me. And I basically landed on this spot of, well, if money was no object, I would want to be making video games. And so that's what I did. Basically, while I was working that job, I was making hobby projects. I was learning about game engines and gameplay programming and some art stuff and trying to mangle together these really scrappy game projects. And I did that for a year or two. And basically, my 5-year plan was to build out a portfolio that would allow me to get hired on to a new job that would allow me to get paid to learn to make video games. I had to apply to a bunch of different places, but eventually I found some place that would hire me, really enjoyed it, and I spent the next few years mostly making mobile games. But then I ended up on this project, Rift of the NecroDancer. There were a lot of programmers on the project. A lot of them would roll on, roll off. We had some junior programmers. It was like a kind of a revolving door of programmers throughout the process where they would jump from project to project. But my memory is that it was me and one other guy, and we were primarily kind of the two guys building out a lot of the foundation of the game early on. And it was a really, really cool thing to experience from a programming perspective, building a rhythm game, because there's a lot of things that you wouldn't anticipate having to account for. Primarily video and audio lag makes sense. You know, you want something on the screen, you know, it transfers through your HDMI to your monitor. There's like a little bit of lag there depending on what kind of hardware you're using. But especially audio lag is a really important one because you are playing a game according to music. And every time you want to play an animation or a sound effect, especially, it has to be on the beat. And so how do you get something to play on the beat? So from a programming perspective, it was really interesting because turns out you can only reliably get sound effects to play when you want them to if you cue them up ahead of time. You can't just tell your hardware, hey, I want you to play this sound right now, go, right on this millisecond. You can't do it, so you have to cue it up. But that presents its own sort of amalgamation of issues because you don't always know when you want sound effects to play. For instance, these enemies coming down the home row at you, you don't know if the player is going to hit it or miss it, so you give it the successful sound effect or the incorrect you missed it sound effect. All that stuff. Really fun, a really cool technical challenge, right? So a lot of our work as programmers on this project was trying to figure out the fundamental beat system that everything else ran off of and extending that so that we could have designers hook up their animations and stuff for different characters and all of that. I remember working a lot on some of the mini games. I worked specifically on the yoga mini game and the burger mini game. I also did a lot of the enemy implementations initially. One that really sticks out to me is the Blade Master. That was a really interesting one to code up because he kind of comes down the row, then freezes, queues up his attack, and then he like teleports down the row at you. Oh, I also did a lot with the dialogue system. So there's a narrative arc that goes throughout the game, and there's characters talking to each other, and they have these sprites and they can have different emotions and going through all the text. And so I did a lot with the dialogue system and worked with the narrative team so that they had all of the tools that they needed on their end so that they could queue up different characters popping in and out or triggering different animations or sound effects from within their narrative script. So yeah, it was a really cool project to work on. So then the question remains, why would I quit that job? Good question to ask. And I think a part of it is that I have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. We're not going to do accents. We're not doing that. I have a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. Not only do I want to focus on programming, but I want to learn the business side of game development and the production side and the game design side. And I felt like in this one job that I was operating as purely a programmer, I was having a hard time trying to break into those different disciplines, but I wanted kind of the holistic knowledge and experience of how games are developed. And I wanted to be able to kind of be a one-man band for everything constituting game development, if that makes sense. Another big reason for why I wanted to quit my job is that somebody got my wife pregnant, and I'm like 75% sure it was me. But yeah, had a baby coming, and it's a really interesting thing. Maybe some of you will be able to relate to this. There was a clear mental switch in my head where with a baby on the way, the term work-life balance suddenly meant something entirely different to me. And I had a really deep-seated desire to be in control of my time, and I didn't want to be chained to my desk, with kids coming into the picture. And it's interesting because I kind of went back and forth for a while thinking, okay, isn't it kind of risky to quit your job? Shouldn't you stay in like the safe position, especially with the baby on the way? You would think, oh, you want actually something that is a little bit more reliable because you have a dependent. That's what they call it on taxes. A dependent coming into the world. But turns out my position wasn't as safe as I thought it would be, because turns out the same exact day that I put in my 2-week notice at my job, the studio just laid off a whole bunch of people. But we'll get into that. I'm getting ahead of myself. But I realized that there is a big gap between deciding to quit my job and actually quitting my job. And in between that gap, there are some things that I had to take care of, and it required a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of planning and a lot of thinking. And I've talked about this before. I'll leave a link to the video in the corner here. But one of the spreadsheets that I made was basically diagnosing different career paths that I could take and how they would fulfill me in different ways. So I would rate each potential career opportunity for me in the future based off of criteria for purpose and pay and social interactions and challenge and growth and difficulty, freedom, of course, and time commitment, and all of these things that I was trying to balance. Okay, what does it actually look like for me to pursue a career where I get to choose what's actually most important to me? And as part of that process for me preparing to quit my job, I kind of took grasp of my finances for the first time in my life, where I actually budgeted and figured out where every single dollar of my income and expenses were going, and I was able to pay down all of my student loans and a lot of that stuff to sort of clean up and plan for the financial runway of me being self-employed. One of the most helpful things actually was me sitting down and meeting with people that were already full-time solo game developers. And so I remember this very vividly. I had at least 4 meetings that I can remember with different people that you may know. One was Aramis, one was Mr. Elliptic, Eli from Treefall Studios, and one was Steven from Isto Inc. And all 4 of them, I just kind of cold emailed and said, hey, I'd love to pick your brain. I'm about to quit my job, but I want to make sure that I'm not going to make any stupid mistakes. Would you mind sitting down and kind of walking me through your business plan and help me not to, run into any major pitfalls? All of them said yes. Had a really good chat with all of them. I took a ton of notes. I'm saying all this just to kind of show that there is a gap between deciding to quit my job and then actually quitting my job. And then there was a lot of preparation for that kind of moment of me putting in my 2 weeks notice and then kind of just jumping ship. And yeah, actually putting in my 2-week notice was really wild. I had this one particular day that I had planned with my spreadsheets and my calendar, put a lot of thought into. The day was approaching. I was like, T-minus 3 days. Here we go. I'm going to put in my 2 weeks notice. The day comes And I sit down at my desk and I log into my computer and I am faced with this tragic message that says, "We're very sorry to inform you, blah, blah, blah. We're having to lay off like X amount of people." It was a lot of people from all over the studio and people that were in my project working on Rift of the NecroDancer. And I just remember thinking like, wow, what a buzzkill. This is the worst time that I could approach my management and be like, "Hey, see ya." And a part of me actually felt kind of bad too, because I was thinking like, I almost wished that I was one of the people being laid off, because then somebody else could have stayed. I don't think they were laying off any programmers though, so I think my situation was relatively safe. But it just made me think, like, was it risky to quit my full-time job? I thought, yeah, of course. And it's also kind of dumb. Like, I wouldn't recommend other people to do that. But it really made me realize from the get-go, before I had even actually left my job, that I'd always thought that going the self-employment route versus the full-time W-2 route is a really risky one. And that staying at my company, at the game studio, would actually be a safe, reliable, dependable place for me to plant my career. Turns out it's not that safe or reliable. And that was just kind of a facade that I had in my head. So it just kind of made me rethink the whole paradigm of working for a stable company, thinking that you will be able to stay there as long as you want, because that's not the reality. Especially in the games industry. Yes, so that was me actually quitting my job, and you guys kind of know the rest of the story if you've been following this channel for any amount of time. You've been following my self-employment journey, and I've tried to be kind of open about that whole process and releasing games and making YouTube videos and making some money and all of that stuff. Fast forward to when the game actually launched. So Rift of the NecroDancer launches on Steam and Nintendo Switch, and that was a really fun thing for me to participate in, because I got to be both an insider and an outsider. Like, I was there and got to see the guts and the mechanics of the game really early on, but I never got to see it in its final form, very polished and ready to ship. And so it was fun for me as a player to see it launch, get to play it, see what improvements the team has made. And so that whole experience was really fun. I remember when they did a live stream for the launch and they were interviewing a bunch of the developers, and I just was able to hop on Twitch and say hi to my former colleagues, and it was fun to get a little shout out from them.
Oh man, is that Thomas Stewart in chat? I see.
It is Thomas Stewart.
So all in all, Rift of the NecroDancer, amazing game. Huge shout out to the team. Big congratulations to everyone who was working on it, and just had such a fun time working on that. The game turned out amazing. It's gotten really good reviews. The team is continuing to pump out cool DLC and partnerships with cool IPs like Celeste, which is awesome. That's just kind of my thought process of why did I quit working on Rift of the NecroDancer. If me 5 years prior or 10 years prior could have seen me working on a game like that, I would think like, you've made it. This is the coolest job. Like, why would you ever leave that? But that's kind of my journey. And I guess the last question is, do I have any regrets? And the answer is yes. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have any regrets. I do have regrets. I have a lot of regrets, but not about quitting my job. I have unrelated regrets. In summary, I am sad to be apart from a project that I really liked, with a team that was awesome, and a job that I enjoyed, making good money, and instead be over here where I am growing in my skills, I'm in control of my time, I'm able to work on things that are creatively fulfilling. I feel like I am moving my career in the trajectory that I want to go in long term. And so it's just a big trade-off. I'm in a good spot. I've launched a few games, and I'm able to work on something that I truly love to do. Thank you all for being a part of that, and I'll see you all in the next one.